The sun was sinking behind the endless Texas horizon, painting the wide-open sky in streaks of gold and crimson. The dusty road that led to the ranch stretched for miles. A pickup truck rumbled slowly along that lonely path, driven by a man whose face told stories of both storms and strength. His name was Ethan Cole, a rancher known across the county for his hard work, quiet nature, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken pain. He had lost everything 2 years ago: his wife, his unborn child, and the light that used to fill his heart. Since then, the ranch had become more than just land. It was a prison of memories. Each sunrise reminded him of promises he couldn't keep, and each sunset felt like another goodbye he couldn't stop reliving. But fate, as it often does, had its own way of rewriting broken hearts. It happened one cold evening, as Ethan stopped by a small roadside diner to grab a cup of coffee before heading home. The place was nearly empty, just a waitress, a crying child at the corner table, and a woman who looked too tired to lift her head. The woman's coat was torn, her shoes soaked from the rain, and her hands trembled as she stirred a cup of soup she probably couldn't afford. The little girl, no older than 7, kept whispering, "Mama, are we going to have a home tonight?" The woman didn't answer. She just smiled weakly and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. Something about that moment hit Ethan hard. Maybe it was the girl's innocent voice, maybe the mother's quiet despair, or maybe the way the world outside felt too cruel for people like them. Whatever it was, he couldn't look away. When he walked over to pay for his coffee, he noticed the waitress arguing softly with the woman. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your card was declined again. Maybe you can come back tomorrow." The woman's face went pale. She turned to her daughter and said softly, "Sweetheart, let's go." But before they could move, Ethan stepped forward. "Add it to my bill," he said, his voice low but firm. The woman's eyes widened, then filled with tears she tried to hide. "Sir, you don't have to. It's just soup," Ethan interrupted, nodding once. "Everyone deserves a warm meal," she whispered, a trembling, "Thank you," and Ethan walked out without another word. He didn't expect to see them again, but the world is small when destiny is involved. The next morning, as he was feeding the horses, he noticed a small figure standing by the fence, the same little girl from the diner. Her clothes were damp, her shoes muddy, and her hands clutched a small teddy bear. "Hey there," Ethan said cautiously, walking toward her. "Where's your mama?" The girl looked up at him, her big brown eyes full of fear and trust all at once. "She's over there," she whispered, pointing toward the dirt road. Ethan followed her gaze and saw the woman from the diner, sitting on the ground beside her, a broken-down car, her head resting against the door. He rushed over. "Ma'am?" he called out. No response. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. Ethan's heart raced. He checked her pulse, faint but there. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his truck and told the little girl, "Get in, sweetheart. Hold her hand." They sped toward the nearest clinic, the old truck shaking against the dirt road. The girl, whose name he learned was Lily, kept whispering prayers, holding her mother's limp hand. "Please, God, don't take her. You can take me instead. Please, just not Mama." Her small voice shattered Ethan's soul. When they arrived, the doctor quickly took her mother inside. Hours passed in silence as Ethan sat in the waiting room, the little girl asleep on his arm. He stared at her, the dirt smudged on her cheeks, her torn pink dress, her tiny hands still clutching that worn-out bear, and something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, his heart didn't feel completely empty. Finally, the doctor came out. "She's stable now," he said. "Severe exhaustion, dehydration, and stress. She'll need a few days of rest." Ethan nodded in relief. When the woman woke up, she found Ethan sitting quietly beside her bed. "You again," she murmured, weak but smiling. "Guess I owe you more than a meal now." Ethan shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, just take care of yourself." But as the days passed, Ethan noticed how fragile she looked, how every breath seemed to carry years of pain. He brought food, blankets, and even toys for Lily. Slowly, they began to talk. Her name was Mara, and life had been cruel to her. She had fled an abusive home, lost her job, and had nowhere left to go. "I was trying to get to my sister in Arizona," she said one evening, her voice trembling. "But my car broke down before we even made it halfway. I didn't know what else to do." Ethan didn't speak for a while. Then quietly he said, "You can stay at my ranch, just until you're back on your feet." At first, Mara refused. "We've already taken too much from you." But Ethan insisted. "You haven't taken anything. Maybe I just need someone to remind me what life feels like again." That night, he drove them both to his ranch, the same place that had once felt so painfully empty. Now, as Lily ran across the yard chasing the old dog, and Mara smiled softly from the porch, something changed in the air. The silence that used to haunt Ethan now felt peaceful. The wind that once whispered loneliness now carried laughter. Days turned into weeks. Ethan taught Lily how to feed the horses, fix fences, and whistle to call the cattle. Mara helped around the house, cooked simple meals, and sometimes sang softly when she thought no one was listening. Her voice was fragile but beautiful, like the sound of hope returning after a long winter. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, Ethan found Lily sitting by the barn, staring at the horizon. "What's wrong, kiddo?" he asked. Lily turned to him with tearful eyes. "Mama says we can't stay here forever," she whispered. "She said we'll be leaving soon." Ethan's heart tightened. He knelt beside her. "Do you want to leave?" She shook her head, clutching his arm. "No, this is the first place that feels like home. You're nice and the horses like me, and I wish you were my dad." Ethan couldn't speak. He just put his arm around her and looked toward the setting sun, wishing time would stop. But he knew Mara was right. She needed to find her own path, rebuild her life. Still, part of him feared that when they left, the emptiness would return stronger than before. Then one night everything changed again. A storm rolled in, fierce and violent. The wind howled, thunder cracked, and rain poured in sheets. Ethan was checking the barn when he heard a scream from the house. He ran inside to find Mara on the floor, struggling to breathe. Her condition had worsened. A fever, the doctor had warned, could return. Ethan carried her to his truck again, but the roads were flooded. He couldn't drive. He sat beside her, desperate, helpless. That's when Lily crawled onto the bed beside her mother, crying softly. "Please, mister," she whispered to Ethan through tears. "If God comes tonight, can you take me instead of Mama? She's the only one I have." Ethan froze. Her words sliced through the storm like lightning. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then he pulled Lily close, tears burning his eyes. "No, sweetheart," he said hoarsely. "Nobody's taking anyone tonight. Not on my watch." He held both of them until the storm passed, praying silently for the strength to protect them both. By dawn, the worst was over. The storm had cleared, and Mara's fever finally broke. She opened her eyes, weak but alive, and whispered, "You stayed." Ethan nodded. "Always." She smiled faintly, and for the first time he saw not a broken woman, but someone who had survived and somehow healed him in the process. Lily woke up between them, her little arms around both adults, whispering sleepily. "You took both," Ethan chuckled softly, tears mixing with his smile. "Yeah," he whispered, "I guess I did." As the morning sun rose over the ranch, the fields glowed golden again, not just with light, but with something far greater, hope. Ethan had started that week as a lonely man, chained to the ghosts of his past. But by taking in a broken woman and her brave little girl, he found something he never thought he'd feel again, family. And that was just the beginning. The weeks after the storm felt like a slow awakening. The ranch, once quiet and cold, now pulsed with laughter, warmth, and the rhythm of new beginnings. Ethan had never imagined that the same walls, that used to echo with silence, would now carry the sound of Lily's giggles and Mara's soft singing in the kitchen. Life was no longer measured by chores or cattle counts, but by moments. The smell of pancakes in the morning, Lily chasing butterflies through the grass, and Mara smiling at him across the dinner table when she thought he wasn't looking. Ethan didn't know when it happened, but somewhere between teaching Lily how to ride a pony and fixing the old porch swing with Mara, he began to feel alive again. And for the first time since his wife's passing, he wasn't haunted by what he'd lost. He was grateful for what he'd found. But life, as Ethan had learned, has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. One crisp morning, a black car drove down the dirt road toward the ranch. Ethan was in the barn mending a fence when he noticed it. The car didn't belong here. The tires kicked up clouds of dust as it rolled to a stop. A man in a suit stepped out, looking completely out of place in the rugged countryside. He called out sharply, "Mara James!" Mara froze when she heard the name. Her face went pale, her hands trembling as she stepped onto the porch. Lily hid behind her. "Who's asking?" Ethan demanded, walking up beside her. The man pulled out a badge. "Social Services. We've been looking for Miss James and her daughter for weeks. You left the shelter without notice. There are procedures, ma'am." Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. Mara's voice cracked. "I wasn't running from you. I was running from him." Her eyes filled with tears. "My ex-husband. He found where I was staying, and I had to leave before he did something to Lily." The agent's tone softened slightly. "Ma'am, we understand your situation, but you can't just disappear with a child across state lines. It's against the court's temporary custody order." Lily clung tighter to her mother's leg, sobbing. Ethan's fists clenched. "She's safe here," he said firmly. "You can't just take them." The man sighed. "Mr. Cole, I respect what you've done, but the law doesn't work on feelings. There's a hearing next week. Until then, Lily has to stay in foster care." The words hit like a bullet. Mara fell to her knees, begging, "Please, not again." "She's all I have." Ethan's chest burned with helpless anger. He'd spent years building fences, taming wild horses, and weathering storms. But this storm was one he couldn't fight with his hands. He could only watch as the officer gently pried Lily's arms from around her mother's neck. The little girl screamed, "Mama!" "Ethan, please!" Ethan couldn't move. Every instinct in him screamed to stop it, to protect them both, but the law was merciless. The car drove away, taking Lily with it, leaving Mara collapsed in the dirt, sobbing uncontrollably. Ethan knelt beside her, his voice breaking. "I'll fix this. I promise." That night, Mara sat by the window, staring out into the dark fields. "You can't fix everything, Ethan," she whispered. "I've spent my whole life losing people. Maybe that's just what I'm meant to do." Ethan took her hand gently. "No, not this time. You didn't come this far to lose her again." For days, he made calls, met lawyers, and spoke to anyone who could help. The system was cold, bound by rules that didn't understand love. Still, he didn't give up. Every evening, he'd find Mara in the barn, holding Lily's teddy bear, whispering prayers into the quiet. Sometimes she'd fall asleep on the hay, and Ethan would carry her inside, covering her with a blanket, wondering why fate had chosen him to witness such fragile strength. Then came the court day. The morning was cold, gray, and heavy with tension. Mara's hands trembled as she sat beside Ethan in the small courthouse. The judge glanced through the file. "Ms. James," he said sternly, "you violated a temporary custody agreement. Why should this court consider granting you guardianship again?" Mara's voice shook but didn't break. "Because I wasn't running from the law. Your Honor, I was running from a man who hurt me for years. I was protecting my child the only way I knew how." The courtroom fell silent. The judge turned his eyes to Ethan. "And you, Mr. Cole, what is your connection to this case?" Ethan stood, hat in hand, heart pounding. "Your Honor, I'm just a rancher. I don't know much about courts or papers. But I do know what family looks like. I've seen this woman work harder than anyone I've ever met. And that little girl, she's sunshine in boots. They're not a burden. They're the best thing that ever happened to that ranch. To me." Mara's eyes filled with tears. The judge studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Cole, are you prepared to take legal responsibility for both mother and child? Should this court allow it?" Ethan looked at Mara, then at the judge. "I already did. Your Honor, the day that little girl asked me to take her instead of her mama, I knew I'd take both." The courtroom was silent. Even the sound of papers stopped. The judge leaned back, expression unreadable. "This is highly irregular. But sometimes the right thing isn't written in the law. It's written in the heart." He paused, then nodded once. "A petition approved. Ms. James retains custody. Mr. Cole, you are recognized as guardian support." "Case closed." Mara broke down in relief, clutching Ethan's hand, whispering, "You did it." Ethan shook his head softly. We did it. That evening, they drove to the foster home to bring Lily back. When she saw them at the door, she ran faster than either of them had ever seen. "Mama, Ethan!" She threw herself into their arms, crying, "I knew you'd come!" Ethan lifted her high, spinning her around as the little girl laughed through tears. "Told you I'd take both," he whispered. Life on the ranch changed after that day. Not in a dramatic movie kind of way, but in the quiet, beautiful rhythm of family. Ethan built a new swing for Lily on the big oak tree, right where the sunlight fell just right at sunset. Mara started baking again, filling the kitchen with the smell of cinnamon and warmth. On Sundays, they'd ride out to the far meadow, Ethan on his old stallion, Mara and Lily on a chestnut mare that Lily named Hope. It became their place, their small corner of the world where time seemed to stand still. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan sat on the porch, watching Mara brush Lily's hair by the firelight. The golden glow wrapped around them like a painting, and he realized something simple but profound. The storms, the pain, the loneliness, they had all led to this moment. "You know," Mara said softly, noticing his gaze, "when Lily asked you to take her instead of me, I thought my heart would stop, but you took both. Why?" Ethan smiled, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I knew losing one would break the other. And maybe God sent you both to fix what I couldn't fix in myself." Mara blinked back tears, then leaned against him. "You didn't just save us, Ethan. You gave us a home. The ranch that once echoed with emptiness now sang with life, a living testament to second chances." On the wall above the fireplace hung a framed photo, Ethan, Mara, and Lily, arms around each other, grinning wide. Beneath it, carved into a small wooden plaque, were the words, "Love doesn't always find you. Sometimes it waits for you to open the door." Years later, when people in town spoke about Ethan Cole, they didn't call him the lonely rancher anymore. They called him the man who took both. And every time someone asked why, he'd just smile and say, "Because sometimes you don't choose family, it chooses you." The story of the rancher, the mother, and the little girl became a whisper of hope across the county, a reminder that kindness has the power to heal the deepest wounds. And if you ever drove down that same dusty road at sunset, you'd see a girl's laughter echoing through the fields, a woman waving from the porch, and a man standing tall beside them, finally at peace. Because love, when given freely, never takes one. It takes both.